Hello, everyone. Welcome to our weekly discussion series that's hosted by the Chaldean Cultural Center in collaboration with U of M Detroit Center, Unique Voices in Films, and CMN TV. I'm your host, Riam Nemu, and our guest today is attorney Carly Hakim Babi. Hi, Carly.
Hi, Riam. Thank you so much for having me today.
Well, you have a very interesting background, which I will share. So, Carly was born and raised in Metro Detroit while living in Mexico City during the summer months. She earned her bachelor's from Wayne State in 2013 and her Juris Doctorate MBA from Detroit Mercy in 2018. Carly devotes her time to criminal defense and representing small business startups. And we have you today for several reasons, including that we are honoring National Hispanic Heritage Month. So, Carly, tell us a little bit about your background. I think I'm not sure that we ever had a guest that has both Hispanic and Chaldean background. So we would love to hear about that. That where were you born and how was it growing up as a Chaldean, half Hispanic?
Sure. Thank you. Well, first, my father's a first generation American. He was born and raised here in Detroit. He's 100% Chaldean. My mom, she was born and raised in Mexico City. She's Chaldean, Spanish, Mexican, and German. Interestingly, both of my great grandfathers, Tobia Kassab and Tobia Hakim, traveled together as young men to America, or so they thought. They just hopped on a ship and they said, "You're going to America." And they landed in Mexico. This was in the early 1900s. So, to make a long story short, they both initially settled in Mexico alone as young men, working, being merchants, trying to find their way. And they both found their own paths. My paternal side ended up finally settling in Detroit, and my maternal side actually ended up settling in Mexico. My father's family in Detroit was one of the first five Chaldean families to arrive here. And as a child, I was told this, but I guess I didn't really know what that meant. I remember an instance being filmed at my grandparents' house. It was the whole family. There was a camera crew. I, I didn't know what was going on, but I then, grew up and realized that, wow, my family's, pretty important. Um, it's said that my great grandfather, Tobia Hakim, he had a house in Detroit on Chicago Boulevard in the Boston Edison district. And many Chaldeans actually, that was their first stop. They came to visit him and he, helped them assimilate into this American culture. That was very important for them. At that time, it was the early 1920s, 1930s through the 60s. There were not that many Chaldeans here. And my great grandfather made it very important that his children and grandchildren be very assimilated into this culture. It was even going as far as not speaking to their grandchildren in Chaldean. So that part was almost lost for a while. But that's basically how where we are today.
And we're celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month. How does that? How do you celebrate this month? What is it exactly? And we noticed that it starts in September 15th to October 15th. So unlike other heritage months, it's not within the 1 month frame. So can you tell us a little bit about the history of that?
Yeah, so Hispanic Heritage Month has been celebrated for over 50 years. It started in 1968 when President Lyndon Johnson started observing that. And it was expanded it was actually, I digress, it was only a week at the time, for 1 week. It was Hispanic Heritage Week. But then in 1988, President Ronald Reagan expanded it to the whole month. So it was finally enacted into law on, I believe it was August 17th, 1988. So why September 15th? Why does it start then? That's a great question. It actually marks the Independence Day of Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. That is their Independence Day. And then on September 16th, Mexico actually celebrates their own Independence Day. It's not Cinco de Mayo, it's September 16th, followed by Chile, September 18th, and then Belize on September 21st. And then the latter half of the month, Mexicans observe called El Día de la Raza. It's the day of the race where we celebrate being a Mexican in our culture. And this is where mixed indigenous and European heritage of Mexico, which I identify as, gets to celebrate their day. And interestingly, if you 2 weeks later, after the month is over, Mexico celebrates Dia de los Muertos, or All Saints Day, the Day of the Dead. And that's when we pay tribute to our ancestors. I think it's important that when people think of Hispanic Heritage Month, it's not just celebrating Hispanics, but it's celebrating how Hispanics have made up this large and growing part in the U.S. population, and how Hispanics have assimilated into American culture. I mean, we make up 18%, according to the last census, of the American population. Yet there's still a lack of representation on every level of society. But Hispanics also have, created their own communities here and made this their home, just like the Chaldeans.
I was gonna say, I feel like there's so much similarities. I mean, when we walk people through the museum, even looking at the ziggurat, which was built in ore, so the structure it's not similar to the structure is not similar to a pyramid, but it's similar to the structure that the Mayan culture used, where they had this type of building. Temples, and it was used for the same purposes. So even something like that from ancient times, there's that similarity. So we had your father earlier this year. I'm
My
sorry.
grandfather.
Yes, your grandfather. He wrote a book about the Tilquetas, that people that from Tilqueta went and lived in Mexico. So he had a book on that, and you were involved by editing the English edition. What did you learn in the process about Chaldeans living in Mexico?
Well, I have to say that it wasn't just editing the book. This has been a lifelong lesson for me. My grandfather is actually the first person who really started to educate me about what Chaldean means. I think that's where we should start. What does it mean to be Chaldean? I mean, first and foremost, it means community and family. But I like to look back at the history, just as I was taught by my grandfather, to know that Chaldeans were some of the first mathematicians, the first astronomers, the most, we are known as the history's biggest opportunists and most brilliant diplomats. That, really gives me a sense of pride, and to be part of this community that, it's, we have a relatively small one, with a common homeland. We are unlike any other evolved civilization that still exists. So we when you're asking me what did I learn from the book, I learned a lot about my history, my family. My grandpa, for over probably nearly 50 years, has spent so much time researching, interviewing, writing. I have to say, this was not his first book about Iraq. This is not his first book about Chaldeans, but this was his first book that really meant a lot to him. He said that he actually told me that he wrote it coming from a place, the most profound place in his soul. So that's why it was so important for us as a family to have this translated into English so we could share with our community here in the US. So the book is about a group of individuals that coexisted and blended themselves into Mexican culture. There were a lot of Chaldeans at the time. If you go into the book, which is being sold on Amazon, you can see all the families listed. There's pictures. I mean, you can see all the families that settled in Mexico for some time. So, you think about this story. They arrived to where they thought they were going to America, and they landed in Mexico. And it is America. It just was not, Detroit, but it was still America, right? So they arrived there. They didn't know anybody. They didn't know the language. They had no support system, no shelter. They were alone with the only thing they had in their pockets was plenty of hope for a better world. So they Mexico, even though Mexico opened their arms to this group of people, they went through this complex process of social adaptation. Interestingly, they landed in a small town very similar to Tequila. There's not much in the town. It's not a city. Everyone knows each other. It's very small. There's maybe one grocery store, one school. So they found that sense of familiarity that maybe first coming to Detroit they would have never found. So that it made it almost easier to cut the umbilical cord to their homeland, fully assimilate into this culture, this rich culture, and they were able to, generate their own family tree.
We have people wanting to know the name of the book, and if you can help, what's the name of the book, and also for them to look it up in your grandfather's name and the spelling, please.
Yes, of course. So the book, I can actually pull it up for you.
His name is I have Ulises Casab.
Ulises Casabreda. So it's called Ixtelkef. I'll have to post it later. I'll post the link so everyone can have access to the link.
I actually also I have a copy. We're very happy to have.
I do have a copy in the other room. Honestly, I could go grab it and show everyone if you don't mind.
No, actually, I don't mind. And I'm trying to look for mine too. It's right here behind me, but you might.
I have one.
I'll wait for you. Okay, good. Sounds good. Yeah, we actually had her father, her grandfather. I keep calling him her father because actually he looks really good for his age, and could be her father. But we had a very, very powerful event when he came and made people so happy. It was very informative. Just gave such incredible information about the Chaldeans that live in Mexico. And here, Carly is back now. Let's get her back on.
All right. So this is the book. It's called Ixtepelkef. In the middle of the 20th century, the Iraqi Christians in Mexico. As you could see, here are just some photos of some of the Chaldeans that arrived in Mexico. This is the back of the book. And I'll get the link so it can be
Yeah,
shared with
yeah,
everybody.
and we can put it in like on our social media. We'll put the link to his book. So,
Wonderful.
what language was it first written in? Was it in Spanish or Arabic?
It was first written in Spanish, so my grandfather primarily speaks Spanish. He speaks some English. Um, as smart as he is, English was not his strong suit. But with the help of his daughters and granddaughters and grandchildren, rather, um, we were able to get this accomplished. And one of his nephews sponsored the book. His name is Karim Murat, and we were able to get this done after 10 years. The original book, I don't think I have it. It is actually me and my sister and my cousin, but I had a kushma. My mom dressed me up in a kushma, and that's when I learned what that was. And I'm on the cover of that book, so I'll have to find
Oh,
that picture.
yeah, you that one you should have really definitely brought that one. So next time, I'm sure we'll interview you for something
Next
else in the future. Yes, next time. So you're fluent in Spanish to the point where you read it in Spanish. Is that
Yes,
you're
yes.
fluent in Spanish? Okay.
So yes, I am fluent in Spanish. I learned both English and Spanish at the same time as a baby. So I think that I mean that's very gives me a connection to the culture, definitely.
So there's a lot of nowadays the focus on identity and people identifying to the point where it's really broken down, and whether it's the gender, ethnicity, religion, however, there is so much focus on the on identity. When you are doing, say, interviews like this, or when you are introducing, or when you're working, so how do you identify yourself? How does your identity come through in your work? And do you even have the sense of there's like a split there, or there's a total embrace of both, uh, where it just comes naturally? Well, I mean, I can imagine it coming like that, but like there's tendencies for us to feel more connected towards one area than the other. For instance, like for me, I was born in Baghdad, and I noticed that there's a different connection based on the kind of schooling and the kind of upbringing I had versus the people that were born in Telkepa, in the village, which was mostly just Chaldeans. But I grew up with more, with my Muslim friends, and some Christians. Actually, I was more Muslim than anything else. So I had a different upbringing, So how do you identify, and how do you kind of combine and embrace both?
Well, it's interesting for me. I it's a great question. I embrace both cultures. I can say that I do that now. It wasn't always like that. When I was younger, I didn't really know what Chaldean was, what it truly meant until I got older. Like I was saying before, our family was filmed, and I knew some words. I knew Itu. I knew um, Heyuacha. I knew Kalula, but those were just words, and the food, obviously, which is my favorite. But in my Mexican culture, I grew up during the summer months with in Mexico City, where my mom grew up. So it's just natural that I would have had a probably a little stronger connection um, to to my Mexican culture. But now I embrace both, and the reason why is because I have more knowledge now, and I've learned a lot more. It's funny. I was actually studying in Mexico during college, and we visited a library in Puebla, Mexico. It's actually it's a museum, and we walked into this dark room. Imagine, like kind of like you ever saw Harry Potter, like Hogwarts, it had, every wall was covered with these very, long bookshelves from the bottom all the way top to the ceiling, probably, I don't know, like 30, 40 feet, very large ceilings. And the bookshelves were enormous, but they're enormous to carry these ancient, enormous books. And this young Mexican guy was giving us this tour, and he says, "Oh, on this shelf, there are ancient books written in Caldeo, Chaldean." And he made a distinguishable difference between Caldeo and Assyrio, Chaldean and Assyrian, or in Aramaic. They were written in Aramaic, but also in Caldeo, in Chaldean. And I'm just standing there. I'm like, that's me. So they were books of astronomy, math, physics. I mean, these were ancient books that our people were able to develop. And now they're sitting in a library in a small town in Mexico. So that was the first moment where I truly merged those two cultures for me.
I would love to learn more about that. I don't know how much information you got from that library, but I know that George Smith, an archaeologist in the 1800s, he went to Nineveh and he wrote a book called the Chaldean Book of Genesis. And in that book, he writes that they found in the Assyrian library a lot of tablets and cuneiforms written in Chaldean and Babylonian. And that's what he called it too. He did not say Aramaic, he called it Chaldean and
Mm-hmm.
Babylonian tablets. So it's interesting, but there's so much to find out about that region that you keep the further you dig in. And I'm so interested to even learn about like the ziggurat, the buildings of the temples. Why was there such similarity? I don't think that that was coincidental, and but that region is so fascinating because of all the firsts that took place there, but because they recorded all ancient civilizations are very interesting, of course, and they're very important to learn. But that particular one is because they wrote everything. So there's an opportunity for us to kind of study and know how they did that. But there's tons and tons of thousands of cuneiforms that they have to catch up with. So it will be some time, but I think it's very inspiring that someone like you, when you come across something like that, you suddenly realize. I think, like for us, the museum and the cultural center and honoring all of these things is to kind of what was or the attempt to try to destroy that history. We kind of are keeping that alive, and people like yourself, you're in Mexico and you come across this and then you suddenly realize it's just the power of technology and the power of the universe that we don't even have to really stay in that place to continue our heritage and our stories and our history. But it's very inspiring that someone like you, and it probably has a lot to do with, of course, your parents and given who your grandfather is, understand the value of that and incorporated it into your life. They built that seed by saying, "Hey, this is who Chaldeans. This is important for you to know." And I want to know, how do you? Um, I don't know if you have children or you seem very young, but how do you pass that on, and in what ways? Because now that you realize the importance of it, how do you continue that? Because a lot of times in the younger generation, I mean, I have kids that, they get very bored easily from what I say, but it doesn't matter. I know I'm planting the seeds, right? How do you do that? How do you pass that information on?
Absolutely. I actually do have a 1-year-old daughter. Her name's Charlotte. And um, I primarily speak to her in Spanish. I think it's very important to carry on this our language, and especially it opens a lot of doors for her. I wish I could say the same for Surah. I my husband speaks it fairly well. I don't he teaches her a few words. My in-laws, of course, are the ones that really teach um, Charlotte, a lot of Chaldean words and songs, and um, thank
Yeah,
you, Paul.
actually, somebody's vouching for that. That you have
Thank
a
you, Paul.
Jewish daughter. Oh, so you, yeah, so you are obviously from your last name. So you are married to a Chaldean, and
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. So she's getting kind of the taste of both worlds, which is amazing. That's another thing that's beautiful about living in this country, is that it's not about just identifying and excluding everything. It's honoring our heritage, but knowing how to incorporate others as well.
absolutely. And I think preserving a language is really important, but I don't think that's the win all end all game here. I it's I I and the prime example is my grandfather. He knows very little Surat, but he could probably tell a lot of people about their history that they're unaware of. So I don't think it's beautiful. I don't think it's like I said, a win all end all kind of thing. I think you can still appreciate your culture. You can still assimilate into a culture and not have the language, but I think it gives a lot more weight, and it does give you that a deeper connection.
And regarding your legal profession, how has that, with your work, your you it says you devote that your time to criminal defense, and do you find that given your background that it is serving in a different and a deeper way, or serves certain communities? Do you find that that kind of also works hand in hand together?
Yes, I do believe that, especially with my Hispanic clients, um, probably due to my empathetic nature. Um, I I always knew that I wanted to help people. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I knew I wanted to help people. And you know, getting into this field is not for the faint of heart. It's it's really not. It's tough. It's emotionally draining at times, but the results that that you get when you put hard work in and you dedicate your time, your mind to finding creative solutions to help your clients, and the results are very rewarding. But time my culture definitely has a lot to do with it. We are a very community based culture, Chaldeans and Hispanics alike. So when a client comes to my office, it's my nature to treat them like family. So this is a time of their life where, especially in criminal defense, and they might not know their rights. They might not know what you know is actually going on with the court system because it's very complex. They're scared. This is the worst time in their life, and they need someone that has their back, that they can count on to make sure that while they're going through this process, that their rights are not compromised. So I treat them with the utmost respect, even though they're in the worst possible situation they've ever been in their life.
Well, that is a big service. And, sometimes you don't think about what goes on with families having to deal with that. I mean, you can only imagine. And to have such a caring person that understands your culture and your background, that is very important. That even understands your language. So Carly, thank you so much. You're really inspirational. And actually, all your family, every time I meet somebody else that is related to you, you guys do wonderful work for the community. We really appreciate everything. And thank you for joining us. Any last words?
Thank you, Liam. I really appreciate you having me here today, and I appreciate your kind words. I like to just say that being part of this community is unique, it's special. I love being, part of both cultures, and thank you for highlighting that in our community.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and have a wonderful day.